Chelsea Jensen here. Tonight we are going to have some pot roast, mashed potatoes, sourdough, green beans, and we're going to throw some carrots into our pot roast, so we have pot roast carrots as well. But let's start by getting our sourdough baked up. We're going to just flip it out on our parchment paper here. I'm going to slowly try to peel this guy off. Beautiful. Almost. I always know it's like, I forgot a little flour in a corner. Luckily, it will all bake up just the same. It will just have a little edge there. Okay, let's get this guy scored and in my hot Dutch oven, and we can get ready with the rest of dinner. So I'm going to do a nice big expansion score on here. This is going to give you that nice peak and let it pop. And then I'm going to just do, again, our simple wheat leaf design. That I'm going to go down the edge because simplicity is sometimes the best. Let's get this guy popped in our Dutch oven. I had my Dutch oven preheating at 500 degrees for the last, I want to say, 45 minutes. So it is nice and hot and steamy in there. And I'm going to put this guy in here. Beautiful. And we'll put our lid on, and we're going to pop this guy in the oven at 500 for 20 minutes. Then we'll take our lid off, and then we'll pop it back in with the lid off for 450 for 20 minutes. And that should give us a perfect sourdough that has a nice kind of golden brown crust that's not too crunchy, but got lots of chewiness. Okay, let's get this guy in there. I'm going to set my timer here for 20 minutes. And that should be the halfway point for when dinner is ready. Let's get our carrots peeled up now so I can take my pot roast out of the oven and pop them in those juices so they can soak up all that extra flavor. And then we'll peel up our potatoes and start working on all the other bits. And we'll make a delicious gravy because my kids can't have mashed potatoes without gravy. So I have 4 giant carrots here. You could also just throw a handful of baby carrots in there if you wanted to. But I always have these big carrots because I buy them in bulk. And I'm not going to leave them in the full thickness as they are because I do want them to soften up here in the next 40 or so minutes. So I'm going to cut them in half. But if I wanted to cook them in there from the beginning, I would leave them whole. But I do recommend throwing your carrots in the last 40 minutes to an hour, because if you cook them too long, they get more mushy, too tender. And you want them to have a little bit of firmness, but still soak up all those delicious juices. So we've got all of our skins peeled off here. And it's like we've got carrot ribbons galore. Pop this in my trash. And let's get these carrots all kind of cut up. I'm going to take the tops off. And then I'm going to take the very bottom tips off too, because they're just never in good condition. And for these thinner parts down here, these ones right here, I'm just going to leave these as they are. And then the rest, what we're going to do is I'm going to have them. And that way I'll have this perfect, amount of carrot that will get nice and tender as it cooks up. Now this guy, this really fat end, I'm going to actually quarter him because again, I don't want my carrots to be so thick that they won't get tender in the time that I want to cook them up. Okay. And then we'll pop these in because nothing is better than pot roast carrots when they've soaked up all of that delicious, flavorful juices. That just gives them such great flavor. Here we go. And then I'll get these last guy out. And then we're going to take out our pot roast. And so what I did is I had a good amount of chuck roast. So it was 1.5 chuck roast because we used part of a chuck roast to make a beef stew at lunch today. So I have them, and I want to pull them out here. I'll discuss it a little bit more so we can put our carrots in. But I sauteed up an onion, and then I seared off my cubes of my chuck roast. So it's been cooking at 300 for the last couple of hours since about 4:30. And so I popped it in the oven right before we went off to soccer practice here. But you see we have all this just flavorful juice, and it's really just beautiful and tender. I would flip them when I got home from soccer. I flipped them, and then I'm flipping again so they stay nice and moist and tender. Because again, I want this lovely meat to be almost as if it's falling apart when we're ready to place it on our mashed potatoes. So again, let's put our carrots in here to kind of soak up this juice. And then at the end, we will actually take some of this juice to make our gravy. So you want to just make sure your carrots all get submerged under here. But what I did with the pot roast or the chuck roast is I cubed it up into big chunks because that's going to allow it to get nice and tender. And then I sauteed up half an onion, and then I seared off the chuck roast, the cubes on all sides. And then I added in pepper, garlic, salt, a couple bay leaves, and a little bit of Worcestershire sauce, and then a scoop of beef bouillon and about a cup and a half of water to go with that beef bouillon. So we have our just beautiful base for it. These are just perfect. And I just want to make sure all of my carrots get tucked under this broth here. Beautiful. Now we're going to put the lid back on, and we're going to pop this in the oven, and we're going to let this continue to cook up and get nice and tender. And then when we're ready to make the gravy, we'll pull it out, and those carrots should be nice and tender by then. But I'm going to keep this. I've had it cooking at 300, so I'm actually going to turn it up to 350 now for this last bit for my carrots to cook off. So we'll get that going, and that way I'll finish off. But when you're doing a pot roast, you don't want to cook it too high for too long because it will really dry it out. You want to go low and slow to get that really tender meat. Okay, I've got my potatoes here. I'm not sure if I'm going to use all of them, but we're going to start. We're going to make some mashed potatoes, and then we'll make a lovely gravy using our drippings from our pot roast. And when I make mashed potatoes, my family's way is with russet potatoes because they give you a really light and fluffy mashed potato. So we'll peel this up, and then we'll give them a nice chop, and we'll throw them in and boil them until they're nice and soft, and then I will whip them into some delicious mashed potatoes.
I have a question. What cut of beef did you use for the pot roast?
So I used chuck roast, which is one of my favorite roasts to use for pot roast because it has a good marbling in it of fat, which makes it really nice and tender. And when you are cooking it like this over a long heat, that fat will really start to break down and again, give you a really juicy and tender piece of meat. And that I will say is my preferred roast, of course, unless I can get, prime rib roast, but I reserve that for special holidays because that is a pricey cut of meat. But again, just a good old chuck roast. I was actually a pack from Costco. So you know how you can get those big packs there. And typically when I get big packs, I will save one part for a pot roast and the other part to make a beef stew of some sort. Because it is also really great in soups. Okay, let's get these all peeled off. When using russet potatoes, you have to peel the skin off. Now, if you don't mind the skin, then I would go, instead of doing a russet, switch for like a Yukon Gold or a red potato. Those skins are more delicate and more, and they are much better for if you want to keep the skin on and to mash them. For russets, you really need to peel them because the skin doesn't get soft and delicate at all. It just actually gets more chewy as it cooks. So definitely give it a peel. And again, russets, I personally think, make the best mashed potatoes because they give you that really light and fluffy one. Yukon Gold red potatoes are a bit more waxy, which means they hold their form together. So your potatoes will be more sticky with those types versus, it's just like russet potatoes aren't good for soups because they lose their shape and body. But they are perfect for mashed potatoes and French fries. Okay, let's start. I think I'm going to start with these. I don't know if I'm going to go to the next one. I always find that a few potatoes actually make a lot more than you think of. Let's get my potato skins out of the way here. And let's get these kind of chopping up, and then I'll throw them in my pot and boil up. I'm not going to cut mine super huge so they cook up pretty fast. The trick is you want to make sure your potatoes get cut fairly uniform so that they cook up all around the same time, especially with russet potatoes, because the longer you cook a russet potato, it will start to disintegrate and then it will disappear. Like you can boil it away to nothing, but the grit that will be left in your pot. So you want to have them the same size so they cook up at the same time so that when you mash your potatoes, you'll have this soft, fluffy one. If you undercook a russet potato, when you go to mash it, that's where you're going to get a lumpy potato. You'll get those little lumps in it, and that's just because you didn't cook it all the way through. Here we go. So we'll get these guys. Let me cut them down, and I'm going to drop these first ones in, and then we will cut up the rest and get going. So we're just going to put them in our water here. And I'm actually going to reserve, when we're done boiling, I'm going to reserve some of this hot water that will have that potato starch in it to make part of my gravy for later, because we'll use some of the drippings, but we're also going to use a little extra bouillon to get a little bit more base, because the drippings for our pot roast has a lot of fat in it, and you don't want to use it just all by itself for the gravy, because it can make a really like kind of a thick congealed gravy. So we're going to do part of those drippings with some just beef broth. There we go. I'm going to turn this up nice and high, and I think we're going to be good with just these 5 really big potatoes, because they'll make a good amount, especially with, well, I always say one of my kids, but really 2 of my kids do not like mashed potatoes. One does not like potatoes in any form except salt and vinegar chips, and that's Evie. But Teddy, I have been trying to get him to eat mashed potatoes for a while, and I finally come to the realization he does not like mashed potatoes, which is crazy because who doesn't like mashed potatoes? Okay. I'm going to pour off just a smidge of this water since it's pretty high. Here we go.
Do you have a question? Are those potatoes from Costco?
They are. It's the big bag of potatoes from Costco. I love their bag of potatoes because they're great for baking too, because you get really big ones. Although one time I got a potato in there that was like this big, and it was so massive. My husband was like, "Oh, that's the right size for a baked potato," because he always thinks that I should find the biggest potatoes ever for it. Okay, while those are boiling up here, let me get my onions chopped up, and we'll get ready to kind of saute these up for our green beans kind of to dinner. There we go. I'm going to slide this over here. I'm going to use 1 yellow onion because I love green beans and onions. And I always like to have one kind of green vegetable with dinner every night. And so green beans it is. Because my green beans are long, I'm going to cut my onions nice and long. So like nice kind of thin slivers of it. That way you'll get the length of them. I always try to cut my onion with the vegetable that it's kind of going to be matching with in the kind of the same shape and size. Okay. We got these. Let me go grab my oil because I forgot to set it out. And turn that up nice and high. And we'll start caramelizing our onions in here. I'm going to put about, I want to say, 1.5 tablespoons of our oil in here. And we're going to start heating up our pan at around I'm going to start with like a 6, 7. We'll turn it down once it starts to cook. Well, let's break all of these onions in there. Separate them, that way they can start getting nice and caramelized for our dinner tonight. There. Sometimes it's easier just to try to break them apart first than try to get it all with my tongs here. Okay. Let me get my hands washed. And we'll get these coated in the olive oil because we want them to start to kind of caramelize up for our main part. Okay. And then we have our green beans here. We'll take them out, and then I'm going to snap some of them in half because I don't want them super long. That way they're a little bit easier to manage. And these are from Costco as well. That's the nice thing about it is I do love their produce at Costco, especially because you can get a lot of organic produce there, and it's always pretty good there, and it's a great price. Okay, I'm just going to take off any of my bits of ends that are already on there. Okay, and let's start getting these. You could always cut them in half, but I find it's just easier to snap some of these bigger ones. Just grab a couple at a time. And I'm just, again, making them a little bit more bite-sized so that they're not super long and difficult to eat. I will say green beans, which always surprised me, is my two youngest sons love green beans, which I'm glad. I always try to get my kids to eat a wide variety of vegetables. And I will say each of my kids eat different vegetables. There are very few that like all the same vegetable, but each one's like different ones. Like Torin, he loves squash, like all the different squash and mushrooms, onions, peppers. He likes all of those. Evie loves salad, tomatoes, raw peppers, broccoli, but that. And Teddy will eat pretty much everything.
I do have a question. Do you have a timer on the potatoes?
On the potatoes, no. What I'll do is once they kind of been cooking for a while, I'll pull one out and I'll take a fork, and I always search for the biggest potato in my pot. And if my fork can go through it easily, then I'll know that it is ready to dump out and get ready for it to mash up. So, and no, I do not use a timer. It's just more of a visual once I get a nice kind of strong boil on it. Okay, let's get our onions a little bit of a toss here. And break it apart so it can start to kind of caramelize up for this. Okay. I'll turn this up just a smidge. Beautiful. And then while we're waiting, I'm going to grab my strawberries out. I always like to take my strawberries out at the last minute because otherwise, if you leave your strawberries out, they get mushy. So let's grab my strawberries because we're going to have fresh strawberries for dinner tonight. My kids have been on a strawberry kick and a raspberry kick recently. We're going to give them a nice wash first. There we go. The other day I bought a pack of, I got a big pack of raspberries, and I was putting them away, and Evie was like, oh, I want some. I walk out of the room for 2 seconds. Evie, Jack, and Teddy ate the entire pound of raspberries in like less than a minute. They were gone, and I was like, oh, so much for having that to go in your guys' lunches. Okay, let's get our strawberries cut up for our fruit. I always try to give my kids a fresh fruit at dinner. And a lot of times I'll prep one of our, like if we do melons or pineapples or something like that, I have to do prep. I'll get that prepped up for the week too during it. But strawberries are definitely a favorite of everyone in the family. So we'll get these. And then my trick with them if you don't have strawberries right at the peak of season, they can be a bit sour. What you do is you just sprinkle them with like less than a teaspoon of sugar, and it helps them sweat out their natural juices, which I think brings out their natural flavor a bit more and makes them so delicious. You don't have to use a lot of sugar. It's really a light sprinkle, almost as if you were like putting salt on your food. It's like a sprinkle of that, and it really enhances their flavors. There we go. Get these guys all cut up here. I've kind of mastered the art. You know, most of the time, you know, you'd be like, oh, just give them the whole strawberries to do that. When I give my kids the strawberries, they eat like this much off and they leave that much, which is a waste. So I always cut them because I try to get as much of that for them to use because it's the worst thing when I see Teddy eating. I look over and he's eating strawberries out of the container and it's literally one bite per strawberry and there's still like 80% of the strawberry left and he moves on to the next one and I'm like, no, we're wasting the precious fruit. When I think we had strawberries earlier this week when we made apple jam or apple butter and Teddy mixed his strawberries in the apple butter and he was like, it's so delicious. He created his own little concoction there. Okay, this should be about enough. One more. Should be about enough strawberries for us tonight. And then we're going to sprinkle a smidge of sugar. But before I do that, let me get my onions tossed here. I'm going to turn them down now to about a 5. And what we're going to do, I'm aiming is to get a nice kind of golden brown kind of caramelization on my onions before I pop my green beans in because I want that nice sweetness from the caramelization to come out. Okay. And then I'm going to check on my potatoes here. I turn it down a smidge since they're nice and got a strong boil. I'm going to grab and then my fork. And this is where I was telling you about how I don't have a timer so much as I just fish out and I find a big potato like this one. Oops. Of course, I lost it. I can already tell they're not ready. But what I do is I just kind of hold it. And if my fork can go through it easily, that's when I know that it is ready. So we'll let those continue to cook. But our sourdough is ready for the lid to come off. So let's bring this over. Got that ready?
Do you ever do bacon with your green beans and onions?
Yes, I do my green beans a lot of different ways. Bacon's one of the ways. I also do bacon with Brussels sprouts, which is so good because bacon makes everything taste better. So yes, I do like a variety of ways for it. Here is our beautiful sourdough. We've got our nice little pop here. You can really see the wheat leaf design showing up. So we'll pop this guy back into the oven. I hear you, timer. Beautiful. And then I'm going to reset my timer for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to bring my oven down to 450 because I do not want it to get a really dark color. I find that when you bake your sourdough to that darker brown, it gets really hard. That crust gets really hard and crunchy once it cools. I like my crust to be nice and soft so that when it cools, it's chewy, not crunchy. So it will feel like, you know, just like the typical chewy thing. The crunchiness, it hardens up too much the next day. Okay. Overboard. Okay, before we throw our green beans in, let me get my sugar to sprinkle over my strawberries. And again, we don't need very much. So again, a very light, as if you were sprinkling salt on your food. That is all you need to bring out the sweetness in the strawberries. It's just enough to get that sweating to go. And I'm gonna grab a spoon. I'll give it a quick toss. And trust me, these will make it feel as if your strawberries were like peak season. That just little extra hint. And I think it causes the strawberries to sweat out their natural juices. And, you know, it's similar to when you're making strawberry shortcake. You toss your strawberries with a good amount of sugar to make that syrup and bring out that flavor. Same here, but you just don't need quite as much.
That says to try cinnamon.
You know what? Somebody told me cinnamon with watermelon not too long ago, and I tried it, and it was definitely interesting. I don't know about the cinnamon and the strawberries. That I feel like they wouldn't go, but you know what? I might have to try it sometime. It just seems so interesting, but it's also like when they're like, try this with watermelon, and it worked. It tasted well. Oh, before I put this in here, I want to put a little bit of garlic in. So I'm going to move my onions out to the side here. And then I've got my garlic. And we're going to let that saute up a little bit, kind of these flavors. There we go. So I'm just going to put in about a teaspoon of my garlic. And we'll let it saute up for a few. I'm going to turn up my heat now to about a 4. With your garlic, don't leave it unattended for too long. Garlic will go from being nice and crispy to burnt in like 30 seconds. They're just little bits and they can really crisp up fast. So we'll get that there. We'll let it saute up. I'm going to check my potatoes here real quick and see how they're going. Let me find a big guy. We're getting closer, but I can still tell they're a little bit firm, but we'll do our press through almost. I'm gonna keep it up nice and high. I've got like a good pat. Oh, that's from the strawberries. I was like, why is there water here? It's when I wrenched the strawberries. Okay, let's check on our garlic now. We'll give it a good stir. Kind of mix it in there now. We'll mix it with all of our onions. Let those flavors come out. And then we'll add in our green beans here. And we'll let these saute up with that garlic and those green beans. Since I have a good amount of time, I don't think I'll put the lid on. But if I wanted to cook these green beans up a lot faster, I would pop my lid on it and let them kind of steam cook with their natural thing until they've got this vibrant green. But since I have a good amount of time before we're going to be eating these, I think I can just do the natural cooking without the lid. So we're going to coat them in all of the olive oil, and then I'm just going to pat them down so they cover kind of the whole surface area of our pan. That way they'll get all of that heat and that steam up to help it naturally cook through. Now, I realized I forgot to grab my garlic salt. I know, and my pepper. So I'm going to grab it real quick over here. So garlic salt, pepper, making sure I had my timer on. I think earlier today I turned off my timer while I was cooking. Okay, let's grab, while we're waiting, I'm going to grab out a little bit of this potato starchy water to make part of my base for my gravy for it. I don't need to wait until the potatoes are completely cooked, but I do want to ladle out some of this starchy water. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix bouillon into this starchy potato water. And this will help thicken up my gravy. You have the natural thickener from the potato starch, and then we'll use some flour as well. But this will make it lovely. This is going to do about 1.5 cups because we're going to be also using the drippings from the pot roast. Let me grab a spoon. And we're going to mix these in. And I'm just going to go with about, I want to say, a teaspoon of beef bouillon for this. And you could also just use straight up beef broth. But I find using this nice starchy potato water really, first of all, it helps dissolve that bouillon. Can't even speak today, that bouillon. And then that will also help give a nice velvety texture to our gravy.
Hey, you have a question. Did you salt the water?
I did not salt the water. I find that when I make mashed potatoes, I don't like to salt the water because potatoes are like these sponges, and I find if I salt the water, I still end up using the exact same amount of salt later, and it doesn't really impact the flavor as much. So I like to just add it towards the end instead of it going in there, because then you're dumping out the salt, but the water too. So I find this way, it's a better way to kind of save some of that sodium, and then it's easier to get that right. Now with pasta, I will salt the water if I'm going to use the salt in my pasta or the water in my pasta sauce. But for today, with potatoes, I never do. Okay, here are our green beans. They are looking fabulous. Let's check our potato one more time. Where did I put my spoon? There it is. Spoon and my fork. Let's see if we're ready on these guys. Let me grab up one. And if my fork can go through it nice and easy, then we'll know that we're about ready. So look, you see how it just slides right through? Our potatoes are ready for our mashing, which is perfect because then we can start making our gravy here. So let me get my strainer. And we'll strain these guys. And give it a good shake. Now, since this is a metal pan, I'm actually going to be whipping my mashed potatoes in the pan, which I love because it cuts back on the number of dishes that you're going to need. We'll use that for our gravy here. We've got our potatoes here. We're going to put our butter in. And then what I do is before I start whipping them, I'm going to let this butter sit and start to melt. That way it's nice and melted when we're ready to pop it in here. So I'm going to use, I like to use around a tablespoon per potato. So I'm going to put in about 5 tablespoons of butter. I've got my spoon right here I can use. And then I'm just going to tuck it underneath these hot potatoes. And I'm just going to let it sit there and melt naturally on its own for a little bit. Because I find when you whip it into the potatoes, when it's melted already, it incorporates much better. If it's cold, you're going to get like a pocket of butter in there. Okay. Get our peppers, or not our peppers, our green beans. As you can see, they're starting to get more vibrant in color, which means we're getting close to them being done, which is perfect. And then we'll give them a nice seasoning up on here. Okay, let me check my temperature or my time on here because I think it might be time for us to start making the gravy. Yep, let's start making the gravy. Where's my pot holders? Here we go. So I'm going to get my pot roast out of the oven. And nice and steamy. Here we go. So we've got our beautiful pot roast right there. So I'm going to ladle out some of this gravy in just a second, or this these juices here in just a second. So I'm going to add some of it right here to my liquid, and then as we're making our gravy, we'll add even more in. You want to leave some of your drippings in your pan to keep your meat nice and juicy and tender, because if you take it out, you will lose some of that moisture in your meat. So don't just take it out all the way. And I don't like to use, again, I don't like to use all of the drippings, just purely the drippings to make the gravy, because with a chuck roast, there's a lot of fat in that meat, and it will make it a really greasy gravy. So you don't want to use it all. So we've got in here. I'm going to put the lid right back on to keep it nice and hot in here. But this Dutch oven is going to keep this dish hot for at least 45 minutes to an hour. That's one thing that's really nice about the Dutch ovens, is they've got that nice residual temperature. Okay, our butter should be just about, so I'm going to pour in a little bit of cream in here, let that warm up as well. About 1/4 of a cup in for our mashed potatoes. And now let me grab my butter and my flour, because we're going to make a roux to build our gravy.
Good question. How long did you cook the roast for?
The roast, I actually popped it in the oven at 430, and I cooked it at 300 for like 3.5, 4 hours, and then the last 30 minutes here I brought it up to 350. So you're going to cook it nice and low and slow to give it really tender and flavorful. And in that, I sauteed up 1/2 an onion, and then I added 1.5 cups of beef broth and about a tablespoon of Worcestershire, and then bay leaves, black pepper, and garlic salt. Okay, let's make our base for our gravy. We're going to add in our butter here because we're going to start with a roux. We're going to let this melt up. I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to melt it over a lower temperature because, again, I don't want it to get scalded or get too high. And while we're doing that, we can start whipping up these mashed potatoes. So I've got my...
You have a question? Did you sear the roast first?
Yes, I did. I seared it off in my pan. So I sauteed up the onions, then I seared them off. So I cubed up my chuck roast. So I had chunks about like that big. And then I seared them off on all sides. That's going to help kind of keep its texture when it's cooking. Give it, instead of it just going just stringy. We're going to add in, 2 pinches of salt for this. We always add more, but I always like to add in a little bit to start with. And we're going to whip these guys up. Now, I'm doing this in my all-clad pan because it is solid metal and it's great for doing this. If you have a non-stick coating on your pot or pan, do not whip your mashed potatoes in it or you will ruin it. So this is just nice because it just takes out one less dish that I have to clean. Okay. Now, we are going to add in, I can already tell, I'm going to add in a little bit more cream. And because I like to have a smooth whip on it, but I never quite know how much cream I'm going to add because you just don't know how starchy each potato is going to be. So I'm going to add in a little bit more. We're going to let that sit for a second because I want that what we've already whipped together to kind of marry together. And while that's doing that, let's make our roux, which is going to be the base for our gravy. So I've got our butter melted in here. And now we have about, 1.5 tablespoons, 2 tablespoons of butter in here. We're going to add in about kind of equal parts flour. So that's about a tablespoon. Let's just start with this to begin with. And we're going to whisk it together to form kind of this paste. And this is what's going to thicken up our gravy. So this is, the technical term is called a roux, which is what we use for, gravies, thicken up soups, in the gumbos. Here we go. And then we're going to give this a quick, and let's give our green beans a quick stir here. I've got them cooking on nice and low so that they won't get cooked too fast, but they're getting this lovely, vibrant green color, which means they're going to have this nice, tender, crisp to them, and then we'll season them up. Okay, so here we've kind of got the base to our roux. I'm just going to whisk it. Now, if you want a deep color gravy, you're going to cook this roux until it gets a golden brown color. But I don't mind having a blonde one. The deeper color you cook it or keep it on here, the more nutty it will have a flavor to it. Think about brown butter. It's going to just have that more, an earthier flavor to it. Okay, let's add in. This is our beef broth and our meat drippings. I'm going to add in a little at a time. And we're going to kind of mix it in and it will start to thicken up. Don't pour it all in at one time or you're going to get a really thick, you'll flood your gravy and it won't come together nice. So let's whisk it. And as you can see, it just keeps thickening up and we just keep adding more and more until you get to the consistency that you want. Here we go. And it is looking great. Okay. So I'm just going to constantly whisk this. The longer you keep it on heat, it will continue to thicken up. And because there is a fat in it, when you take it from heat, it will also start to kind of like thicken up, congeal because of the fat base in it. So you want to keep it on a low temperature until you're ready to serve it. Otherwise, it will also congeal up. Still a bit thick, so we'll add a little bit more in here. Now, if you like to have also a richer color, but you don't want to do the work of, browning the butter, what you can do is add in a little bit of kitchen bouquet, which is a browning seasoning, which a lot of times I add into my gravies. It has a great, lovely flavor. It comes from like roasted veggies, but it will give you a more of a kind of an amber brown color to your gravy. There we go. Get all those bits and drippings in here. And now I'm going to turn this down to really low, but look, we've got this nice kind of thick gravy that will be delicious on here. And let me give it a little bit of a taste. Perfect. You can taste the pot roast flavors into it. So I'm going to keep it low because I want it to stay and not thicken up too much. So if you keep it on high temperature, what will happen is you'll boil out the liquid and it'll get really thick. But if you turn the heat off, it will congeal because the fat will cool. So you got to keep it on low. Let's get our green beans here. We're going to add pepper and some garlic salt. And then we'll whip up our mashed potatoes and we will be ready to grab our bread out here in just a second. Okay, so we put in about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And we got our garlic salt. We're going to do a good shake over it. We're going to let those hydrate through the natural steam. Now let's whip our mashed potatoes here. So, let's see. I'm going to give them a quick taste, see if we need to add. I'm going to add again a little bit more cream because I want them a little bit thinner and a little bit more salt. Just a pinch. I'll give this a quick whip and then these should be lovely.
Is your all flat stand on your Amazon book?
It is. This is I believe this is I want to say it's like the 3-quart all-clad sauce pot. And I absolutely love this because it is great for making mashed potatoes or boiling pasta. It's like a great size. Okay, we've got our mashed potatoes.
And what type of potatoes?
These are russet potatoes. So I used 5 big russet potatoes in here. And we peeled them, we boiled them until I could push a fork through them. And then we added in butter, salt, and cream. Okay, let's toss these. Oh, and perfect timing because our sourdough is ready. So I'm going to just move this over here because we'll be coming in hot. And let's get this guy out of the oven. Okay, so we did our last 20 minutes at 450. So we should have a golden brown pop on our crust. Look at that. Beautiful. And I like, again, you can always cook it longer if you like a darker crust or a crunchier crust. But I prefer one that has just a little bit of crunch, but is mainly a chewy crust, especially when you think about the bottom of it. So we're going to take it out of our Dutch oven because these Dutch ovens stay hot for a very long time. And if you leave it in there, that bottom will get browner and crunchier. But here is, again, our beautiful one. We've got this nice kind of golden brown on the bottom. Again, a beautiful sourdough loaf with our little wheat leaf design. And again, this is made with just 3 ingredients: flour, water, starter, and salt. And starter's made out of flour and water. Let me turn this guy so you guys see. Again, our beautiful sourdough loaf here, our golden and our little peak. And I always say, it's such a simple design, but it is so pretty. It's your classic. Okay, guys, let's get ready to serve up dinner. Look at our beautiful pot roast and our carrots here. I'm going to Again, I'm going to turn all of our meat. Do you see how tender it is? It's just falling apart in there. It is gorgeous.
You got a couple of requests for the recipe for your sourdough bread?
Yes, I actually have that recipe card posted on my page for everyone. Normally my members, I have cards for them, but this is one I gave for everyone. And I have both. This is my big loaf. And then I also have my smaller size loaf on there, as well as a video on how to make your own starter from scratch. So starting from day 1 through day 7, which is the time you needs to make to be fermented enough to make a nice sourdough loaf of bread, as well as a whole tutorial on how to make your very first sourdough with every single step. Because if you don't know what you're doing, it is definitely difficult, but once you know how to do it, it is the easiest thing ever. Well, guys, it's time to serve up our dinner here. So let me got that. Got to grab all my spoons to serve everything up here. We won't cut into the sourdough yet because if you've ever made sourdough, it needs to sit for 10 minutes after you come out of the oven. Otherwise, it will be gummy on the inside. But let's get everything turned off and off. Let's get everything served up over here. This is cooled down. Okay. So let's start out with our pot roast. So for dinner tonight, we have our delicious pot roast. This is a chuck roast that we seasoned. We cooked in beef broth, bay leaves, onions, and a little bit of Worcestershire. And then we have our carrots that we added in the last like 30 to 40 minutes of baking so that they're nice and tender and have all of that rich flavor, but they don't get too mushy. We've got our green beans and onions, our sautéed green beans and onions that we seasoned with black pepper, garlic, salt, and then of course the caramelized onions and garlic, and a good dollop of our creamy mashed potatoes made with russet potatoes, butter, cream, and a little bit of pink Himalayan sea salt. And then of course, with all mashed potatoes, you have to have a little bit of gravy, and I love the gravy on my pot roast as well. And then we'll have our fruit and of course a slice of our sourdough bread for dinner. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link and search for what we made. So we've got our pot roast and our green beans and mashed potatoes and sourdough. And you can always cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. So I have my all-clad pans, my hex-clad, my Le Creuset, cutting boards, knives, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen, I have added into my storefront for you guys in case you're interested in what we use. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.